The hive city of Vastatrix 9 groaned under the weight of 1,000,000 souls. Its towers clawed at the sky like blackened, rusted fingers, and the skies above blood ash and acid rain. Smoke choked the streets, carrying the stench of industry, decay, and uncounted deaths. Within this sprawling labyrinth of steel and stone, the life of Karith Von had been as unremarkable as the millions who toiled under the Emperor's gaze. Born in the lowest sector, he had learned early that survival demanded obedience, fear, and silence. Hope was a luxury, and the Emperor's name was both a blessing and a cudgel. Karith had always known the whispered tales, stories of those chosen for the Emperor's service. Some said it was honor beyond imagining, a path to immortality in his light. Others said the chosen were consumed, their souls sacrificed in ways the mind could scarcely endure. Karith had dismissed such rumors as superstition, until the day the priesthood of the Adeptus Ministorum came for him. The summons arrived in the form of a brass cog, stamped tablet, delivered by a pale, skeletal courier whose eyes were too hollow, too empty. The tablet bore the seal of the Canonist Superior, a glyph that burned into his mind like a brand. You have been chosen to serve the Emperor directly. Prepare yourself for the rite of ascension. Fear had no proper name as it gripped Karith. The streets seemed to narrow. The towering stacks of furnaces and factories loomed like predators. He was taken by the Sisters of the Ministorum, clad in red robes stitched with gold thread, their chants echoing through the steel corridors. Each word they spoke reverberated like the tolling of a death bell. Inside the sanctum of the Cathedral of Eternal Light, the air shimmered with incense smoke and the hum of psychic resonance. Karith's eyes darted across the vast chamber. The altar, carved from black marble veined with red, glowed faintly, as if it had been forged in the heart of some dying star. Around it, the priesthood moved in a choreography older than any memory, their faces hidden beneath hooded veils. They did not see him as a man. He was already less than human, a vessel for a purpose he could not yet comprehend. He was stripped of his clothing, adorned with ceremonial bindings etched with sacred symbols and purity runes, each one designed to sever a fragment of his individuality, to prepare his essence for what was to come. The chanting grew louder, swelling to a crescendo that made the walls of the cathedral quake. Karith could feel the vibrations in his bones, a resonance that seemed to pull at the very fibers of his being. The Canonist Superior stepped forward, her voice cutting through the haze like a sharpened blade. Karith Von, you stand on the threshold of the Emperor's light. You will give yourself wholly, that his vision may endure, and that the Imperium may never falter. He wanted to speak, to cry out, but no words formed. In his mind, shadows danced, whispering doubts, screaming warnings. The Emperor is merciful, the voices said. The Emperor demands all. The ritual began. The priesthood drew symbols in the air with burning phosphor wands, leaving trails of luminous glyphs that hovered like suspended fire. The cathedral itself seemed to respond. The hum intensified, vibrating through the marble, the air thickening until it was almost liquid. Karith's vision fractured. He saw the faces of countless souls, those who had been before him, hovering in the shimmer of the ritual energy. Some wept silently, others screamed in silent agony, and a few radiated light so blinding it seemed to pierce his mind. Then came the touch, not of hands but of presence. It was as though the universe itself bent toward him. His flesh tingled, hair stood on end, and a burning pressure built behind his eyes. He could feel something vast and ancient, an intellect beyond comprehension, surveying him, weighing him, judging him. He understood, in a way no mortal should, that the Emperor was not merely watching. He was consuming and testing, sifting through the layers of flesh, will, and soul, separating Karith from himself. In that moment, the rumors made horrifying sense. This was no honor. This was no ascension. He was to be unmade and remade, a fragment of his essence to feed the Emperor's unending vigilance. The priest's chants became a single, suffocating roar, reverberating inside his skull, matching the rhythm of his terrified heartbeat. Karith's vision blurred, alternating between the black marble of the altar and fleeting glimpses of stars, galaxies, and the Emperor's throne itself, a golden monstrosity burning with psychic fire, the Astronomican at its core, radiating a light no human could endure. And yet, there was a part of him that felt awe. That part whispered, perhaps foolishly, that he was chosen, that his suffering had meaning, that through pain he would touch something eternal. The canoness raised her hands, drawing the final glyph in a spiral that seemed to stretch into infinity. The energy surged, a blinding psychic storm, and Karith's body convulsed as if the universe itself sought to tear him apart. This was the true moment of sacrifice. As darkness began to crawl at the edges of his consciousness, he understood the first immutable law of being chosen for the Emperor. Once the ritual begins, you are no longer yours, not in life, not in death. You exist only as a conduit for the will of the God Emperor, a spark in the machinery of a galaxy, spanning empire that would never cease, would never forgive, and would never mourn. And, somewhere deep in the shadows of the cathedral, eyes that were not mortal watched him, measuring his soul, waiting for the moment when flesh becomes light and the chosen truly vanishes. The streets of Vastatrix 9 had never seemed so vast, so oppressive, so alive with eyes that were not eyes. As Karith Von was led through the hive city by the sisters of the Ministorum, the lower levels seemed to writhe in shadows, as though the very foundations of the hive were aware of what was coming. The populace did not cheer, they did not cry. They watched, silent, as if the act had already been decreed by fate itself. To some, it was spectacle, to others, a reminder that obedience was safety, defiance was death, and the Emperor's will was absolute. The procession moved like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Red-robed sisters flanked Karith on either side, their chants a low, omnipresent vibration that seemed to seep into his bones. Behind him marched cantors and acolytes, carrying icons of the Emperor, so immense that their weight threatened to crush the shoulders of those who bore them. Each icon was inscribed with countless names of the fallen, saints of the Imperium, and perhaps a few who had been chosen before him, souls devoured and immortalized in gold. Karith's hands were bound with sigil-forged chains, etched with purity runes that glimmered faintly in the light of the towering street lamps. Every movement of the chain tugged at his flesh, but he felt little. He was not a man here, he was a vessel. Each step, each breath, each pulse of blood in his veins carried him closer to the altar and further from himself. Above, the hive's machinery groaned and belched smoke. The sky was a churning black sea, broken only by shafts of polluted light and the far-off glimmer of orbital weapons platforms. The air was thick with ozone, burning fuel, and ash, a stench that clawed at Karith's throat, yet he felt the psychic presence before him even more keenly than the air around him. It was as if the Emperor's gaze had extended beyond the cathedral walls, tracing him, watching his mind, weighing every thought. The crowd parted when they saw him, a silent river of faces frozen in awe, fear, and silent reverence. No one dared to approach, no one dared to speak. Children were pulled behind their mothers, men bowed their heads, and the elderly crossed themselves, murmuring prayers for the soul that was already slipping from its body. Karith could feel their eyes, yet they saw only a shadow of him, a form carrying the weight of destiny he barely understood. At the rear of the procession, the priesthood of the Ministorum carried artifacts of unimaginable power. Crimson reliquaries, sealed with the blood of saints, pulsed faintly with psychic energy. Golden censers swung rhythmically, releasing smoke that shimmered unnaturally, twisting the air into shapes that seemed almost sentient. The smell of incense and ozone merged into a suffocating perfume, each breath burning his lungs as if it were fire and holy light fused together. Karith's mind began to fracture under the psychic pressure. He could see glimpses of the Emperor's throne far above the hive, burning with golden fire that was simultaneously beautiful and terrible. He felt other presences, souls trapped, screaming in silence, woven into the psychic fabric of the universe. Some whispered to him, their voices thin and desperate, "Do not resist, it is too late, you are already his." Others laughed, cruel and mocking, reminding him that the act of sacrifice was never meant to honor the individual. The road to the altar was long, winding through the heart of the hive. The streets themselves seemed to conspire to unnerve him. Shadows twisted like living things, molten pipes hissed like serpents, the distant echoes of factory forges rang like the beating of a monstrous, unseen heart. At times, Karith thought he saw ghostly hands reaching for him from the walls, from the machinery, from the shadows, but he knew, rationally, that it was his mind unraveling under the strain of the ritual's psychic resonance. As they approached the grand spires of the Cathedral of Eternal Light, the procession slowed. The cathedral's gargantuan doors loomed above, etched with runes of power and sacrifice. Beyond them lay the inner sanctum, the site of the final act. Karith's heartbeat became deafening in his ears. Fear, awe, and a strange, perverse sense of anticipation tangled within him. One of the senior sisters whispered to him, her voice like steel and smoke, Remember this, vessel. Once you step beyond these doors, there is no return. You will become less than man, and yet more than mortal. The Emperor will see all, and the Emperor will decide your fate. Karith wanted to ask questions, to plead, to bargain, but no sound came. His voice had been stolen long before he arrived. What remained was only thought, memory, and the unrelenting sense that he was being drawn inexorably toward an abyss that both terrified and beckoned. Finally, the cathedral doors swung open. Light, or something more than light, spilled out, a blinding golden wave that seemed to ripple across reality itself. The crowd outside fell silent, and the sisters lowered their heads. Karith's soul quivered at the threshold, and then he stepped forward. Each footfall echoed like a drum beat in the void. The air shimmered, vibrating with the psychic presence of the Emperor. Time seemed to stretch, slow, and fold in on itself. Karith realized, in a moment of horrifying clarity, that this was not merely a journey to an altar. It was a passage between life and death, between the mortal and the immortal, between the man he had been and the vessel he was becoming. The ceremonial spiral leading into the heart of the cathedral twisted downward, as if descending into the very core of the planet, or perhaps into the very warp itself. Karith's mind was besieged by visions, endless halls of light, oceans of fire, and faces, so many faces, of those who had been sacrificed before him. Some were crying, some were screaming, some were smiling in a way that was unnervingly serene, as though they had accepted their fate fully, and yet were aware of the cost in ways no mortal could comprehend. And all the while, the chanting grew louder, a thunderous wall of sound that became both physical and psychic. Karith could feel the vibrations tearing at his very essence. He knew, without needing to be told, that he was already becoming something else, something apart from humanity, something woven into the Emperor's will. At the end of the spiral, at the heart of the cathedral, the altar waited. Its surface gleamed with black obsidian, inscribed with golden runes, pulsing faintly like a living heartbeat. Beyond it, the golden light of the Astronomican seemed to reach, stretching out through the cathedral, drawing him in, devouring him, and holding him in place all at once. Karith's final thought before the next stage of the ritual began was a single, stark realization. There is no escape, there never was, and the Emperor watches, always. The altar loomed before him, black and gleaming like a wound in reality. Its surface was etched with golden runes that pulsed faintly, as if alive, as if breathing in time with the cathedral itself. Karith's bound hands felt heavier with each step. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest, but the Emperor's presence already pressed against him, folding reality into something incomprehensible. The light emanating from the Astronomican was no longer distant. It was here, in the cathedral, crawling along the walls, burning into the eyes, suffocating thought, and yet, impossibly, illuminating everything. The Canoness Superior stepped forward, her hands raised in the final invocation. Her voice cut through the psychic storm like a scalpel. By the will of the God Emperor, I consecrate this vessel. Let his light consume you. Let your flesh serve as a conduit. Let your soul endure where mortals cannot. The chanting of the priesthood intensified, each syllable vibrating with an almost tangible force. The air itself seemed to pulse with energy, thickening, distorting. Karith felt his mind fray at the edges, his perception of reality bending in impossible ways. The cathedral no longer seemed a building. It had become a living conduit of psychic power, a lattice of light, sound and pressure designed to tear away the mortal self. He tried to focus on something, anything, to anchor himself. The faces of the sacrificed before him flickered in his vision, some serene, some screaming, some absent. He could feel their pain, their terror, their unwilling surrender. And yet, beneath it all, there was a thread of something else, something enduring. Perhaps it was the essence of the Emperor's will itself, flowing through them, weaving their souls into the fabric of the Imperium. The Canoness extended a hand, and the final glyph of power blazed into existence, hovering in the air like a star torn from the heavens. Karith felt it before he saw it, a presence that was not flesh, not mind, not time, not space. It enveloped him entirely, folding him into itself. Pain tore through him like fire, burning both body and soul. Yet even as he screamed silently, he felt an unearthly clarity, a sense of vision beyond mortal comprehension. For an instant, he was everywhere. The throne of the Emperor floated in his mind, its golden spires extending into infinity. He saw the stars as a lattice of light and death, planets and hive worlds spinning like cogs in a colossal machine. The Astronomican pulsed at the center, a beacon of order in an uncaring universe, and he realized the truth. This was what the sacrifices served. Not life, not honor, not glory, but the unending vigilance of the Emperor. The first shock of psychic communion shattered his perception of self. He could feel every soul that had been sacrificed before him pressed against his mind, a choir of pain, awe, and servitude. Some whispered warnings, some offered solace, and some laughed in ways that made his teeth ache. The canoness's voice became distant, replaced by the roar of existence itself. Karith's flesh felt unreal, as if it were no longer his. His hands, bound in ritual chains, seemed insubstantial, almost ghostly. Each heartbeat was a drumbeat in a cosmic pattern, and he could feel threads of his mind stretching outward, intertwining with the cathedral, the reliquaries, the light of the Astronomican. He understood, horrifyingly, that he was being unmade even as he was being made anew. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, lifetimes passed in the span of a heartbeat. He glimpsed the Emperor, not as a man, but as a presence, a force that dwarfed comprehension. Eyes burned into him from every direction, ancient and infinite, filled with judgment, purpose, and a cruel mercy no mortal could understand. The essence of the Emperor reached into him, not to destroy, but to consume, and through consumption, to grant a terrible form of immortality. Karith's individuality would not survive, but fragments of his being would endure, woven into the very light that guided humanity. Pain intensified. His mind, body, and soul convulsed under the psychic pressure. Memories of home, of childhood, of fleeting happiness were shredded like paper and absorbed into the greater design. He screamed in silence, feeling his voice vanish into the immensity of the Emperor's psychic presence. Yet, even in this annihilation, he felt a perverse clarity. He understood the machinery of the Imperium as never before. He saw the countless worlds, the grinding forges, the endless war, and knew the sacrifices were not in vain. They were the gears, the sparks, the unseen fires that kept the galaxy from unmaking itself. Then came the touch, not literal, but an overwhelming presence pressing into the marrow of his being. Every nerve, every thought, every pulse of life was measured, tested, and either preserved or consumed. For a heartbeat, Karith thought he might perish entirely. But then a strange, terrible sensation overtook him. He was being folded into the Emperor's will, his soul becoming a filament in the lattice of light and order that spanned the stars. Pain became illumination, suffering became purpose, and terror became the awareness of eternity. And in that moment, he saw it, the reality that no mortal was meant to comprehend fully. Those chosen were never truly dead. They became part of the Emperor's vigilance, eternal servants woven into the psychic light that sustained humanity. Some might linger in echoes, their awareness intact but forever merged with the Emperor's mind. Others would be consumed entirely, their existence a sacrifice to maintain the fragile order of a galaxy at war. Karith's final mortal thought was a paradox of terror and awe. He was nothing, and yet he was everything. And as the last shred of his individuality dissolved into the cathedral's blinding light, he understood the ultimate truth. To be sacrificed to the Emperor is not death. It is annihilation and transcendence in equal measure, a terror beyond imagining, a service beyond mortal comprehension. And the Emperor sees all, judges all, and devours all that is offered willingly, or otherwise. The altar's black surface shimmered with a light that was no light at all. It was the absence of mortality, a void infused with the Emperor's infinite will. Karith Von stood, or perhaps floated, on the threshold between what had been and what could never be. His body trembled, but the trembling was no longer entirely his own. It belonged, in part, to the cathedral, to the psychic currents, to the light of the Astronomican itself. The Canoness Superior intoned the final rites. Her voice was no longer human. It reverberated in the very marrow of existence. Vessel of flesh, servant of spirit, you are the Emperor's will made manifest. Let the light consume, and let the soul endure. Karith felt himself stretched across dimensions. Pain erupted along every nerve, 1,000 daggers of fire and ice piercing him at once. His mind split like a star collapsing. Memories of a life he barely remembered, his mother's gentle voice, the taste of stale bread, the laughter of long-dead friends, were torn from him, their essence consumed into the golden lattice of the Emperor's vision. And then came the choice he could not make. Not in thought, not in action. It was forced upon him by the immense psychic presence to survive. He must surrender utterly. To resist is annihilation. Karith felt the friction of his mortal were like a blade against the hull of a starship. Every instinct screamed to cling to identity, but every pulse of the Emperor's presence pressed in, reshaping him, fracturing him, redefining what it meant to exist. The first transformation occurred subtly. His body became lighter, almost insubstantial, as if he were evaporating into the cathedral's psychic currents. The chains binding his wrists glimmered, then dissolved, leaving only faint traces of golden light trailing where they had been. His vision sharpened, yet expanded. He could see threads of existence connecting every human, every soul, every star in the Imperium. The galaxies themselves were woven in patterns of light and death, a tapestry sustained by sacrifice, devotion, and endless war. Pain returned, now psychic in nature. He felt the echoes of all who had been sacrificed before him, their presence a chorus of torment and purpose. Some whispered consolation, "You endure, you serve, you are eternal." Others screamed warnings, "You are nothing, you will vanish." The line between anguish and enlightenment blurred until it no longer mattered which was which. The Emperor's touch intensified. Karith could feel his essence being folded, compressed, and interwoven with something vast and unrelenting. He understood, in a way that defied sanity, that some sacrifices became spiritual anchors, their consciousness preserved to maintain the Astronomican's psychic brilliance. Others were consumed entirely, obliterated, their only legacy the light they fed. And some were twisted into forms unrecognizable, entities neither alive nor dead, servants of the Imperium beyond mortal reckoning. A profound terror seized him. If he survived as a spiritual filament, would he retain anything of himself? Would he watch centuries pass, worlds burn, billions die, trapped in service to a godlike mind? If he were annihilated, would there be even the faintest echo of his existence left? Or would he vanish utterly, forgotten by reality itself? The cathedral vibrated. Light streaked across the black marble of the altar, embedding itself in Karith's consciousness. He screamed, not aloud, but within, a resonance that shook the very lattice of psychic energy around him. Flesh and soul were no longer distinct. Every thought, every fear, every memory became material for the Emperor's purpose. Then came the final act. Karith felt the last thread of his individuality snap. For an instant, he was pure consciousness, a spark in the infinite expanse of psychic light. Time stretched and folded. He glimpsed the throne, the Emperor, the endless hive worlds, the machinery of war grinding endlessly across the galaxy. He realized that the pain, the fear, the surrender, it was all necessary. Each sacrifice, each fragment of soul, each act of obedience was a gear in the Imperium's vast engine, keeping humanity from collapsing into chaos. And yet, there was a horrifying duality. While he endured, a part of him felt utterly lost. His identity, the man who had walked the hive streets, the boy who had feared the summons, was gone. In his place was something else, awareness, stretched thin across light years, tethered to the will of the Emperor, yet aware, eternally conscious, yet unable to act freely. He was both present and absent, a servant of the God Emperor in a state beyond comprehension. The canoness lowered her hands, and the final glyph blazed and disappeared. The psychic storm subsided. The cathedral returned to silence, though the air still shimmered faintly with lingering energy. Karith, or what remained of him, hovered above the altar, no longer mortal, no longer merely human. He was now a filament of will, a fragment of the Emperor's vision, bound eternally to the light that guided humanity through darkness. Outside, the citizens of Vastatrix 9 knew nothing. To them, the ritual had ended. The chosen had been sacrificed. The Emperor's will had been served, and life continued, as it always did, indifferent to the cost. But inside the cathedral, in the still and radiant psychic light, Karith's awareness endured. He saw everything and nothing. He felt everything and nothing. He was gone, yet present. And in the depths of his new existence, he understood the immutable truth of being sacrificed to the Emperor. You are unmade, remade, and consumed. You serve eternally. And in the vast machinery of the Imperium, your pain, your surrender, your very essence are the price of humanity's survival. The cathedral was silent. The golden light that had consumed the altar and everything upon it had dimmed to a faint, lingering shimmer, like the last echo of a star dying in the void. Outside, Vastatrix 9 continued its grinding existence. Smoke belched from the furnaces, hives swarmed with millions of faceless workers, and the machinery of the Imperium continued without pause. To the citizens, Karith Vaughn had been sacrificed. He was dead. His story ended, a mere footnote in the canon of Imperial devotion. But within the cathedral, reality had shifted in ways no mortal could comprehend. Karith no longer existed in the form he had once known. Flesh, memory, and individuality had been stripped away, leaving a filament of consciousness intertwined with the Emperor's will. He saw the Imperium as never before, the countless worlds, the infinite wars, the engines of industry, the psychic currents threading through the hive cities, the fleets of the Imperial Navy slicing silently through the void. All of it hummed in synchrony, guided, maintained, and sustained by the sacrifices of countless individuals like him. The Canoness Superior turned to her sisters, her expression hidden beneath the golden veil. To them, the ritual was complete. To them, Karith's essence had been consumed in service of the Emperor, and they would continue their duties without question. What they could not know, and were forbidden to consider, was that some fragments of the sacrificed remained, trapped in a state between life and death, observing, guiding, sustaining. Karith was one of those fragments. He did not move, he did not breathe, but he saw all. He felt the movements of humanity as if they were threads on a loom. Every birth, every death, every act of violence and devotion recorded in his eternal awareness. Outside, the people whispered rumors of miracles and curses, of blessed deaths and cruel fates. Some believed that the Emperor had looked upon their loved ones and taken them into his light. Others whispered darker stories of souls consumed, of lives erased, of eternal torment hidden behind the cathedral's doors. None of them knew the full truth that sacrifice to the Emperor was not simply a death. It was annihilation, transformation, and eternal servitude, a merging of will and essence so complete that mortal concepts of life and death no longer applied. Karith's consciousness wandered the psychic lattice of the Imperium. He glimpsed other sacrifices, other vessels who had endured, some fractured, some serene, some screaming in silent torment for eternity. They were the hidden engine of the Imperium, the unseen servants who maintained the Astronomican's light, guided fleets through the warp, and fed the psychic vigilance that prevented humanity's annihilation. Each filament was a silent, eternal witness to the horrors, triumphs, and ceaseless wars of a galaxy ruled by unfeeling order. And yet, even as he drifted, Karith could sense anomalies. Some vessels had resisted, leaving fragments of defiance, sparks of individuality that had survived the Emperor's will. These fragments were dangerous, unstable. The Imperium would never allow such consciousness to flourish. Such deviations had been corrected before, by agents of the Inquisition, by sanctioned psychers, by the hidden hand of the Adeptus Terror itself. Karith understood, with an infinite clarity that terrified him, that he had no choice. He was bound, an instrument, unable to act beyond what the Emperor required. Still, he could observe. He saw the priests and acolytes carrying on, as if nothing had changed. He saw the citizens of Vastatrix 9 returning to their work, unaware of the cost of their survival. And he saw the Emperor himself, distant yet omnipresent, seated upon the golden throne, the Astronomican blazing like a beacon in the psychic sea, consuming and channeling the essence of countless sacrifices to maintain the fragile order of humanity. In the quiet of this psychic eternity, a thought arose within Karith's new consciousness, a fragment, a whisper of what he had once been. We serve, we endure, we are nothing. And yet we exist. It was both comforting and horrifying. He understood now that the Imperium's true power was hidden in plain sight, in the uncounted sacrifices, in the unbroken chains of obedience and horror. Mortals saw only ritual ceremony and piety. They did not see the cost. They did not see the filaments of consciousness, the eternal servitude, the fragments of humanity scattered across the psychic lattice. They did not know the Emperor consumed his chosen, yet preserved them, bending existence itself to sustain his vision. Karith's awareness stretched outward, touching countless worlds, witnessing wars that spanned millennia, and observing countless souls sacrificed in the same blinding light. And he understood the cruelest truth in the Imperium: nothing is wasted. Every death, every fear, every scream, every act of obedience became fuel for the machine that was humanity's only chance of survival. And as he drifted in the psychic light, eternal, unending, and unseen, he realized a final, chilling truth. The Emperor sees all, the Emperor consumes all, and in his light, the line between life and death, sacrifice and service, individuality and eternity is gone. Karith Von was gone, and yet he was everywhere. He was the Emperor's servant, he was the Emperor's witness. He was the light that guided humanity through the darkness.